The words of a great teacher to a curious student. I know I have the best of time and space and was never measured and never will be measured. I tramp a perpetual journey. Come, listen all. My signs are a rainproof coat, good shoes, and a staff cut from the woods. No friend of mine takes his ease in my chair. I have no chair, no church, no philosophy. I lead no man to a dinner table, library, exchange. But each man and each woman of you I lead upon a knoll, my left hand hooking you round the waist, my right hand pointing to landscapes of continents and the public road. Not I, not anyone else can travel that road for you. You must travel it for yourself. It is not far, it is within reach. Perhaps you've been on it since you were born and did not know. Perhaps it's everywhere, on water and on land. Shoulder your duds, dear son, and I will mine, and let us hasten forth. Wonderful cities and free nations we shall fetch as we go. If you tire, give me both burdens, and rest the chuff of your hand on my hip, and in due time you shall repay the same service to me. For after we start, we never lie by again. This day before dawn, I ascended a hill and looked at the crowded heaven, and I said to my spirit, when we become the enfolders of those orbs and the pleasure and knowledge of everything in them, shall we be filled and satisfied then? And my spirit said, no, we but level that live to pass and continue beyond. You're asking me questions, and I hear you. I answer that I cannot answer. You must find out for yourself. Sit a while, dear son, here are biscuits to eat, here's milk to drink, but as soon as you sleep and renew yourself in sweet clothes, I kiss you with a goodbye kiss and open the gate for your egress hence. Long enough have you dreamed contemptible dreams. Now I wash the gum from your eyes. You must habit yourself to the dazzle of the light and of every moment of your life. Long have you timidly waited, holding a plank by the shore. Now I will you to be a bold swimmer, to jump off in the midst of the sea, rise again, nod to me, shout, and laughingly dash with your hair. I am the teacher of athletes. He that by me spreads a wider breast than my own proves the width of my own. He most honors my style who learns under it to destroy the teacher. I want to welcome you to room 303 and to learnstrong.net and to a series that I am now going to deliver for teachers called Dare to Teach. I remember it was a number of years ago sitting at the University of Nebraska waiting for a meeting with the great Dr. Larry Andrews, who I am dedicating this series to, along with the greatest teacher coach I ever knew at Worland High School, Doug Riekert. And I was sitting waiting, and I, as kids do, you kind of start looking around, and there was, on a wall, there was a quote. Now, I've seen this quote attributed to any number of people. This quote, "Those who dare to teach must never cease to learn," was attributed to the great American educator Horace Mann. And there was something about that quote that I found powerful in the very beginning. Those who dare to teach must never cease to learn. It would be years later that I would be teaching Wordsworth's classic Tintern Abbey, lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey. And he says, "And so I dare to hope," though changed no doubt from what I was when first I came among these hills. And that idea of daring to teach leads me now, at what is going on soon to be 35 years of work in room 303 here, to answer a few simple questions about what it is that I'm doing and why I'm doing it. A number of years ago, someone was debating with me about teachers versus doctors and the whole challenge of emolument or salary, and why it is that doctors shouldn't be paid more than teachers, and why it is that doctors are given so much more respect. And I made the quick observation, well, we do quite different things. The reality is that doctors, think about a brain surgeon. A brain surgeon is given the task of walking into the surgery and to complete the surgery, and hopefully, of course, the patient remains alive. And yet, think about it. That surgeon is by and large not paid to do what we teachers are paid to do. Every day, we are paid to take risks. That is to say, we'll try things we don't even know if they work or not. And we're ready to say, you know what? For this student, I'm willing to try about anything. I'm going to take a risk. Brain surgeons don't have the luxury of that, and to that degree, teachers will never be paid enough for the risks that we have to take all the time, every day. And let's say it out loud, worldwide, this job of ours has become not less challenging, but far more challenging. In spite of the fact, to echo the sentiments of the great Walt Whitman and the lines from Song of Myself, passage 46, and the first lines of 47, I know I have the best of time and space and was never measured and never will be measured. All of us as teachers can say that now, teaching in this amazing epoch in time. And yet, the challenges are self-evident. The goal of our series of talks here that will be posted at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, you'll be able to find this playlist just like all of the others that are there. The goal is to help us again ask the question, why do we do this thing called teaching? To discover or to rediscover, right, why it is that we are doing what we're doing, and to capture again, if we have lost it, the joy of teaching. Because with all of the work that is, of course, associated with teaching, the joy is somehow often lost, especially those of us who have been doing this for longer than the magic year of 7 years, as they've often said. Although, to be fair, I think burnout is probably happening for many, many of my colleagues much earlier than 7 years. So our hope is to speak of any number of topics. This is an introductory set of comments now. We're going to talk about what I always speak about when I talk to young, soon-to-be teachers. I will always say to them, you can come from the finest curriculum, schools and that curriculum. You can have the most amazing people to prepare you for the experience of walking into a classroom. But everything in the end is going to be for you about energy conservation, because you're never going to have been so fatigued in your life. I've spoken with, for example, athletes who went through their university experience, gaining, of course, their teaching credentialing, but they were athletes, and they laughed at me when I said to them, you'll have never been more fatigued than you will be at the conclusion of your first week of teaching. And they literally laugh at me only to come back and say, oh, I've never been so fatigued and tired in my life. And I will say to them, wait until the end of 10 years, till the end of 20 years. And for those of us that have survived 3 decades, the question is always, how do you do it? Where do you find the energy? And so we're going to have to talk about that idea of energy conservation. We'll also speak in this series in what I've called the 3-5 paradigm. We're going to look at 3 domains of teaching. We're going to look, and I think in order of importance, we're going to look, first of all, at teacher, the individual teacher. Okay, we're going to ask about the individual teacher. Then we're going to talk about that second important domain of students, right? Because we got to ask this question. When I first came to room 303, I sought out teachers that had been doing it for over 20 years. There were a number of them in the building. I just mentioned Doug Riekert as an example. And I asked them 2 simple questions. One, do you think students have changed over the last 20 years of your teaching? And without exception, they all said, absolutely, they have definitely changed. And then I would ask the second question, fundamentally, what's different about them? And although they danced in different ways around the topic, almost all of them said, fundamentally, students have changed in relationship to their understandings of authority. You can't just tell them anymore what to do as a coach or as a teacher. You have to give a reason why. Now, that was a few years ago, and I don't think anything has changed in that regard. So we're going to talk about who are these students that we're tasked with teaching, whether we're doing it, for example, face-to-face, or as is increasingly happening, of course, because of any number of reasons online. How specifically do we think about the student population and the way that student population is changing and will continue to change? And then finally, the third domain that we'll look at from teacher to student is everybody else beyond the classroom. All of those other communities that are so vital for our, can I use the term survival? And if we're going to be an accomplished teacher, if we're really going to get the job done, we have to think about all of that. The communities that we work within and around. So we'll be talking as well about that. So that's our 3 domains. That's the 3 of the 3-5 paradigm. The 5, if you've been following any of our work over the years at learnstrong.net out of 303, you know that we talk about the big 5. Namely, anytime we pick up a text, like for example the one we started with from Walt Whitman's classic Leaves of Grass, passage 46 and 47, we'll always ask 5 questions. What does the text say about? epistemology. That is to say, what you can know, right? Because we'll talk about different types of levels of knowledge. So we're going to ask about, for a teacher and for students and for those outside of the classroom, epistemologically, how do we understand ourselves, our students, and those outside? The things that we know. From epistemology, our second of the big five, they go together obviously, is ontology. That is to say, who are you? You're obviously a body, but you're way more than that. You're clearly a mind. Wait, is that the same thing as calling it a brain? Well, no, the mind is the brain working. Well, okay, so we have a body and we have a mind, but is that all that we have? Well, the ancients will argue, no, there's actually the capacity to observe the mind at work. Who is doing that observations? We'll call that any number of terms. We'll call it spirit. So body, mind, spirit. To be a successful teacher, you have to balance all of those. You have to have some sense of who you are ontologically. Those two are a pair. Our next two of the big five are a pair. Psychology, sociology. The study of the individual mind, psychology. What are our primary motivations? What are our primary fears and anxieties? We need to ask that question if we're going to think about students at all. And of course, sociology, the group itself. That is to say, groups behave often differently from individuals, and so we're going to want to ask about sociological understandings as well. For example, there are any number of teachers who quit teaching, not because they hated to teach in a classroom, but they struggled to somehow survive the experience of working with their colleagues. That's a sociological demand that is placed upon teachers that we have to think about as well. And then finally, if our big five is going to lead us to ultimate questions, which I think it must if we're going to use this paradigm, from epistemology and ontology, from psychology and sociology, we've finished with the last of our big five. And of course, if you followed our work at all in room 303 at learnstrong.net, you know that that final big five is the question of pain, suffering, what is often called the question of theodicy. Why must bad things happen? Why is it that terrible pain and suffering will happen? And if you're going to pick up this profession of teaching, then be prepared. You're going to meet with all kinds of pain and suffering. And of course, typically, when bad things happen, we have a tendency to ask, why did this happen to me? That is to say, we're kind of thinking of ourselves as somehow a victim in a universe where all this stuff is happening to us, and we somehow have to find some answer to why this is happening to us. Of course, as we pointed out so many times in different lectures in room 303, you can ask that question, why did this happen to me, forever, and you never get to a legitimate answer. So we're going to ask that we change the 2 to a 4 and ask, why did this happen for me? We're not celebrating the pain as instructors and teachers that we will encounter, but we are asking this question. Can I learn from it? Can I learn through it? Can I somehow be a better teacher, a more informed teacher, a more compassionate teacher through the experience of pain itself? If we can find a way to do that, we might be able to grow as teachers. And of course, for us, that's the ultimate goal. To finish, this won't shock you, because we're in room 303, we will take a literary approach. I mean, consider the fact. We just began with the great Whitman's lines of Song of Myself 46. We're going to take this literary approach because I think it's an important one for us. We will often say in room 303, we are the stories that we tell and retell. We're also the stories we decide to accept and the stories we decide to reject. And as teachers, we are defined by the stories. And so for us, we'll look back at the ancient stories, obviously Homer and Virgil, Plato. We're going to take a look at Marcus Aurelius, Dante, Shakespeare, Milton, Emerson, Thoreau, Emily Dickinson, of course. And we've mentioned Walt Whitman, and all the way up through the great poet Amanda Gorman. So we will work all the way through literary texts. And of course, we're going to pay homage to some of the greatest inspirational professional educators from, of course, Socrates. I've mentioned Horace Mann, Piaget, John Dewey, Vygotsky, and many of the other influential thinkers as we're working then into the 20th and late 20th and early 21st century. Howard Gardner, Jordan Peterson, and other great theorists who are challenging us to think about this thing called education and teaching. But in the end, I will say it out loud, lay my cards on the table. I am at a point in my own career, now soon to have been 4 decades in a classroom, that it is time for me to ask once again, why are you still doing this? When people ask me, why haven't you retired yet? That's a legitimate question to me. And I want to ask again, what were the reasons, the motivations that brought me into the classroom? And are those reasons and motivations still apropos? have they changed over time? And I think that they will change. Talk to any teacher that's done this over 2 decades. And he or she or they will say, yeah, things for me, the motivations for me have certainly changed. I will be personal at times with my own reflections on what led me into room 303 specifically, teaching in a rural community in a very rural state, and what it is that has kept me here, and what those motivations have been. I'll be excited to talk about that, but I will challenge us to take this journey. Now I'm to Dante, aren't I, and to Homer, of course, with the Odyssey, to take this journey together. And as we do this project of asking these personal questions, I'm going to challenge you to, have some kind of note-taking system, to sound like a teacher for a moment, some kind of note-taking system where you can respond to some of the questions that we will ask, to challenge ourselves to again return to the fundamental questions. Isn't that what Thoreau says in Walden he went to the woods to do? The essential facts of life. What are the essentials for us as teachers? I want to challenge us to do this together, and I'll finish with a literary text that is sacred in room 303, Longfellow's Psalm of Life. Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. And of course, that ability to have patience is central to the idea of what makes great teaching and great teachers. So we'll ask some of these questions as we work together. Come back and join us again at learnstrong.net. Dare to teach. Thank you.